Hey guys, Jay's 2 cents here. If there's ever been a time that I'm gonna beg you to actually watch the entire video, it's now. Because we're gonna talk about what people are freaking out about right now, which is California's Title 20 and the supposed ban on gaming computers being sold in the state of California, or the state of California, Washington, Oregon, Vermont, and Hawaii, also known as the West Coast Coalition, plus the weird black sheep somewhere out there in New England. But we actually spent some time on this video trying to get some information, and we waited until we could get all the facts so that you guys can actually be informed on what's really going on here. I think you guys might be surprised, but we also wanted to make sure that this wasn't some clickbaity video that a lot of people are really trying to cash in on right now, giving you guys actual facts. So keep that in mind. All right, so obviously we're talking about the CEC, or California Energy Commission, Title 20, Tier 2 standards for computers. And people already are like, what the hell, that's a lot of big words. We've spent more time actually trying to remove all the lawyers slash Public Utilities Commission slash jargon out of these documents to try and get to the actual root of what's going on here. We also used Intel's document, because Intel has actually been really involved in this, and you'll understand why when you understand the regulations. So first and foremost, this is not new. This isn't new at all. This is something that actually went into a planned effect back in 2016. What do I mean by planned effect? Anytime a utilities commission or a legislature or any sort of law goes into effect, there is a period of time at which companies or those affected by said laws have time to understand the compliance regulations and fall within those regulations, or just choose to be outside of those regulations and not do business in the states of which follow this. Now, if we're talking about California here, some of you might be like, why the heck are we also talking about Washington, Oregon, Vermont, and Hawaii? Well, that's because I mentioned at the start of this video kind of saltedly, the West Coast Coalition. Anything California does, Oregon and Washington are guaranteed to follow suit. Hawaii as well. Vermont, I'm really not sure why Vermont. I think that's like the, hey guys, can I play too? Kind of a legislature thing. Moving forward here, Title 20 is something that went into effect, or planned effect, back in 2016. There's different tiers, there's different items affected within Title 20, and as time moves on, they basically had a year to prepare for every single one of these categories, and then when each tier went into effect. And then everyone's kind of freaking out and talking about this now because Tier 2, which is the final tier essentially when it comes to desktop computers, and then later in December of this year they're moving on to monitors, basically went into effect July of this year, so just now. And people noticed on the Dell website that it says you cannot ship those items to the states that I mentioned, and that's because those particular computers from Dell do not correspond with the regulations that have been put in place in these 5 states. So what are those regulations here? And this is the part that a lot of people are freaking out, because all they're seeing is that it's an Alienware from Dell that can't be sent to California. So automatically the articles that you're seeing, the headlines, the attention-grabbing headlines, the Reddit threads, the YouTube videos that are going out there are all specifically engineered, in my opinion, to get the gamer riled up, because I don't believe the authors actually understand necessarily what's happening here. Now, I haven't read all of the articles, so I hope that someone out there is actually putting out some reliable information to get you guys kind of educated as to what's happening here. But specifically, it says the Title 20 standards are cost-effective, technically feasible, and limit the amount of electricity computers and monitors are allowed to consume when not in active mode. That's the first thing most people are not talking about here. They are targeting the different states of idle and sleep, not your computer being on and doing something. They are specifically targeting computers that are left to go to sleep, and then you've got the 15-minute sleep period where it wakes back up quickly, and then you got the deeper sleep or hibernate mode, and the amount of power that these computers consume when they're on and not active. The standard set targets for energy consumed in the 4 non-active modes based on the computer's expandability score. So that's another thing that people aren't talking about here. They are taking into effect the expandability of a computer. Can you put a graphics card in it? How much RAM does it have in there? What kind of RAM is in there? All of these things get you an additional allowance in terms of kilowatt hour consumption. There's a big old formula. Intel has it on their website. I'm not gonna bore you guys with that type of stuff. I wanna give you guys the information to understand what's happening here, not so much the calculation method involved. We're gonna do very high level discussion here so that people can understand that. But let's say, for instance, we're talking about a mini ITX system with 1 PCI Express 16X slot, 1 NVMe drive, and 2 memory module slots. That system would actually be allowed less consumption or kilowatt hours per year than, say, a Threadripper system that has 8 memory modules or 7 full-length 16x PCI Express slots. So, and even 4 NVMe slots. All of those items that can potentially be utilized are taken into the account when it comes to the expandability score, which means higher watts and kilowatt hours are available to that system under this regulatory outline here. Which already is a little backwards from what everyone's thinking. You would think the smaller system would be less regulated because the possibility of it using power is less because you can't hook things up to it. It's actually the opposite. The more expandability you have in your system, the more power you're allowed to it, which means the smaller ITX rigs actually are the strictest regulated. So here are the allowances for additional energy use based on the identification and the classification according to the CEC. Add-in cards, which in itself is kind of vague. That's like saying if you could plug it in, but add-in cards. Additional hard disks, obviously SSDs and spinning drives. Graphics cards, obviously probably the biggest glutton in your system if you know the truth. High bandwidth secure system memory. So they specifically regulate memory based off its bandwidth because that's the easiest way to determine what kind of memory it is without just saying DDR3, DDR4, etc. So it's just about its memory bandwidth. That's the factor they use. Ethernet capability, integrated display, refresh rates above 300 hertz and monitors, and that's a whole separate discussion there. System memory, video surveillance cards, you know, those cards that have a bunch of the little mini coaxials that you plug in security cameras to, and then wired Ethernet or fiber cards. So each one of these things, if they are in your system, pre-built, remember we're talking pre-builts, will actually increase the kilowatt hour limit that you're allowed to have in a non-active state per year. In my viewers, most probably closely related category is going to be SIs or gaming SIs, Origin PC, Digital Storm, BLD, Corsair. Whoever's selling gaming systems is probably who you're considering most. Alienware, obviously, however you feel about Alienware, it's still an SI. You are only allowed 75 kilowatt hours per year in the crazy calculation that Intel uses calculation based off of the CEC and their regulations. Remember, we're talking about non-active hours here. It can only consume a maximum of 75 kilowatt hours per year. Now, if you have a system that, let's say for instance, has an RTX 3090 in it, that adds 50 kilowatt hours per year budget, that means the little small form factor pre-built is more heavily regulated and held to a tighter standard than a big system that could actually use a lot of power. It's kind of dumb, but it makes sense because there's not such thing as a one-size-fits-all category of computer. Now there are systems here that are already considered CEC exempt as of 2018. Remember, this is a multi-year rollout type of regulation here. Small scale servers, which is like what we have here in the studio that we built with our Unraid and our RAID and all that sort of stuff. High expandability computers, which we'll talk about in a second what those are. Mobile workstations and workstation as defined by CEC standard. Now they have to meet the following requirements to be considered TEC exempt. So there's 3 major requirements here, and then they have some bullet points underneath each one. So the power supply efficiency. Obviously power supply plays a huge role on the efficiency of the system. Now it's gotta be 80 plus gold IPS, which is PFC 0.9 or at 50% load. And then there's a level 6 DOE EPS efficiency requirement. I have no idea what that is. We didn't bother looking it up. It's obviously part of the power supply spec. But energy efficient Ethernet functionality. I've never in my life paid attention to how much power the Ethernet plugged into a system that's off could be powering. And then the power management settings themselves. The display has to turn off within 15 minutes of inactivity. And have you ever noticed in Windows that's a default? This is part of this right here. System sleep or off within 30 minutes of inactivity, which is again the default setting in Windows. It says note, small scale servers and rack mounted workstations are not required to meet the power management requirements. If the server goes to sleep, it's not serving anything. High expandability computers. Now that's obviously in this. Now high expandability computers is gaming computers. That's essentially what that is. To be a high expandability computer that falls within this exempt category must meet the 2 following requirements. It must have a 600 watt or greater 80 plus gold power supply and a graphics card, a discrete graphics card that is 600 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth or greater. Now that essentially equates to a 2080 Ti equivalent. You can do the math. You can go and look at all the GPUs and they'll list what their bandwidth is. And it must have a discrete graphics card that meets that requirement. So the irony here is that they're actually trying to save power. The lower end gaming systems that do not meet these requirements because they don't have a high-end graphics card and they don't have a high capacity power supply don't meet these requirements to be exempt. Therefore, your high power usage gaming systems are exempt. So in fact, when it comes to the way the SIs are speccing all of this out and the fact that they can get certified, Dell, that screenshot everyone's kind of freaking out about, now, if you go in there and try to take that computer that is not California compliant, that says that the 11400F and has the 1650 Super in there, if you go in there and then add a 600 watt gold power supply and a 3080, you still can't ship it. So what that means is that Dell has actually taken that certified SKU, because remember, there's one computer there that you can send to California. And everyone's like, well, what's with that one? They're the same parts, they're the same parts. Myself included, just looked at that for face value and said, why can that one be sent to California? It's because Dell actually got that particular SKU and that system certified in the state of California for CEC. Yes, 50 state legal computer. Things I never thought I would say again. All right, so what this means to the two different categories of viewers I have right now. If you're a build your own type, this doesn't affect you in any way. Unless they start trying to regulate parts individually, which I don't see how they could actually enforce or do, but they could just stop bringing the parts in. Hope we don't get there. This doesn't affect you in any way. You're more affected, obviously, by the price of parts than anything happening here. For the person that doesn't build their own computer and wants to buy one, you have a couple of options here. You hope that the company is actually speccing out their build it on the website where you click boxes that will actually be smart enough to know, like, this is California legal. When it comes to the SI, we just have to hope they're smart enough to update their database to know if the criteria is met for the exemption here, that yes, they'll ship it to the state. Or you can do what a lot of people do when it comes to car parts. Just have a friend in Arizona, bounce ship it for you. I mean, there is that. It sucks, but a lot of people do it. They're not targeting gamers specifically. They're targeting gluttons. And what I mean by gluttons is, and I'm guilty of this, I think all three of us in this room and probably thousands of you watching right now are completely guilty of walking away from your computer and leaving it on. That is what led to all of this. If you're also like me and you like to turn off a lot of the power saving modes and sleep mode, then we're definitely at fault for all this. But you can't necessarily fault the Power Utility, or the Public Utilities Commission and the CEC for wanting to reduce this type of waste. I hope the way we explain the exemptions, the way the expandability score works, who's actually being regulated here, who's being targeted, puts a lot of you at ease, because really at the end of the day, unless you were going to buy an SI system, which I think a lot of SIs right now are still shipping to California, they haven't stopped, this doesn't really affect you right now. Monitors might. That's something coming December of this year, and I'm not going to even talk about monitors because you wouldn't even believe what we had to go through to dig up this level of information. Most of the people that are talking about this are just regurgitating and repeating an old 2016 LA Times story that has no information in it. And by the way, if you go to the CEC's website and you actually go through the drop downs to find this information and you click desktop computers, it says 404 not found. So the commission that is in charge of this can't even keep their website up to date. I'm just going to end it there. Let that sink in.